Good morning to the Caron YouTube audience and to those of you who are in person. Today is the fourth Sunday of the Easter season and the 25th of April 2021. I'm happy to be coming out to YouTube through Magic Mountain. Very happy to have some residential inpatient folks from different units around campus in the room with me this morning. And I know some of you are watching on the live stream. So delighted to have you here. And I feel just a little discombobulated, so bear with me if I lose my mental track. I'm sure that's today's going to go the way it goes. There's a theme for the day. That would be a good place for me to start. I remember to recenter myself. And today's theme is one of my 19 themes that I take up in rotation. And it's a lovely theme for this week. And really important and has a lot of meaning for me. The theme is freedom. And I know if I were to grab my outlines, I had a bunch of them I played with over the course of the week, but a number of them start with this observation, which is that in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the core traditions which informs the journey of recovery today, you have a lot of people who have commented on a proliferation of promises, hopeful statements that are made about people in recovery in the core text of the Alcoholics Anonymous movement. So there's some promises that are associated with various steps, steps 5, steps 10, step 9. And then there are promises just sprinkled through the literature. And so the point there would be that there are all kinds of positive rewards of undertaking a journey. I was saying to one of our patients here that if you're in detox or coming off of detox and you're feeling like you're mentally fuzzy, if you just stay on the road of abstinence and recovery, they say after a period of time you'll feel like you might be getting your marbles back. It doesn't mean that necessarily your marbles were great in the first place, but that's one of the promises, is that effective cognition begins to sort of come back online. And in fact, that has a deeper meaning than I could even say. But the reason I mention AA's many promises is to contrast it with another one of the recovery fellowships, which is Narcotics Anonymous. And one of the ways that NA years ago used to distinguish itself from the AA, when those were two sort of almost rival communities without the 250 recovery communities that are out there today. NA was like, AA has a bunch of promises, NA we have one promise. And the one promise of NA was freedom from active addiction. And I think there is a claim being made by the NA community in that, which is that that's probably really what one turns to a recovery program for, and it implies something really important, which is that active addiction is a form of captivity, or people depicted it as chains, people depicted it as imprisonment. But I'm going to make an assumption that this sounds like good news to you, and I hope I'm correct. I hope that you can, if you're listening to me or watching or whatever, that you have some way in which this touches you meaningfully. That, and I would like to ask you to think about it for a minute. Like, what does it mean to suggest that you were in need of freedom? How is that informing what your experience was of the before? And in what way would things like captivity, even slavery, oppression, be words that would talk about your suffering? Because I think that's a very important lens that is, first of all, a very helpful corrective to a mistaken lens that the society frequently brings to the conversation around addiction. So the mistaken lens that the society often brings to the conversation around addiction is that the hypothesis that a fellow, I'm going to pick a straw fake person who's not sitting there and call him Hubert, that Hubert, one of our patients, could choose not to have used. He could have just simply decided on any given morning, this isn't working for me, in the Dr. Phil sense of the question, how's it working for you? And opted out of continuing to use. And if you believe that, I would urge you to come and hang out with us here for a while, because it's, I think, extremely compelling when you meet people who are coming to treatment. And what you'll find is that they are brilliant, effective, competent, resourceful, sneaky, tough, strong-willed, obstinate. Like, if you want to have somebody get something done, ask an addict to do it, and they will figure out a way. And so if those skill sets were to be applied with the notion of, hey, this is like not working for me, I'm just going to stop, you would think that that incredibly resourceful, conniving, adaptive, person would figure out, I just need to like trick myself into not doing this. And it doesn't appear to be that simple. So in recent weeks, I have talked about like thinking about it as spiritual captivity and the deliverance or a rescue. And I've talked about last week how honesty is an incredible point, like just telling the truth. There are various aspects of this that come into play, but the simple notion that it's a voluntary and in that sense a moral mistake is not one that flies in the face of the evidence of highly effective and competent and skillful and even tricky, sneaky people who cannot stop themselves from doing this. Brain science helps a little bit, and the more, rather than the moral, the medical idea that the brain has become sort of automated in its processes of addiction, and that we have lost the capacity to use our front temporal lobe cognitive decision making to interrupt those very now limbic and more primal brain processes is very, very helpful medical description. But I just spent 3 days mostly on Zoom attending a very, very interesting and important addiction conference where some of the greatest minds in addiction thought today spoke and presented. The keynote speakers, especially on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, have like charged me up. I come back to the playing field here at Caron with a feeling of exuberance and excitement about the way that the addiction field is now like trying to enlarge its scope and understanding in ways that are going to be very important for what we can do for you and what you can do for yourself. And the turn is not away from the medical, it's not away from the brain science, but it's to ask the question, how does this brain dysfunction get started? What is behind it? Why did I become a person whose brain is so dysregulated in this peculiar way? And there are very, very important tells and there's all kinds of great evidence out there now to support what I'm about to say, and some of what I have to say today might still be on the front edge of sort of speculation and need additional science, but there's people who say, oh, like treatment is not evidence-based. That's completely incorrect. If you were to purchase from a newsstand today, Time Magazine's recent special edition on addiction, it's out there for sale. It's been out for several months. It lists many of the great thinkers, and it gives you insight into addiction as science, family implications, and all the different sort of behavioral ways in which addiction presents itself. Because we have to think about, when we talk about freedom, I'm talking about not just freedom from the alcoholic from taking a drink. I'm talking about freedom of what used to be called like the addictive personality, or the idea that I will tell you, I'm still dangerous around a bowl of Cheetos. And that has to do not just with my brain's irregular and not healthy functioning, which I definitely will confess to, but it has to do with antecedent causes that were survival strategies which happened in my early childhood and adolescence as the brain was forming that made me form differently than other people. In the same way that people develop depressive or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorders, all these other forms of mental health that are not optimal, develop in many ways as a result of the conditions, the causes and conditions of our developmental story. We are the product of our experience. And there are things that cause my brain, in order to try to survive crap I was going through, that develop these autonomic processes that are very hard to override as an adult. And I think that's a kind of captivity. I'm stuck in my childhood. I'm trapped in patterns that actually helped me survive early, but now are not working well for me. And in order to find freedom from those sad, stupid, crazy loops, which is how other people describe them, I don't mean to shame myself or to shame others, because we feel so ashamed, most of us, when we take a look at what we were doing against what other people seem to be able to do without. It's really disturbing. So, in 1989, I began my own recovery from substance use disorder. And I thought of it only in relation to alcohol. Cocaine, marijuana, narcotics, I would admit those were also problems, and I decided to suspend them and the hallucinogens. But the thing I could not free myself from was the alcohol and marijuana repetitive cycle. And since 1989 to 2021, I am privileged and fortunate and blessed, and I don't know, maybe even I should say lucky, that I have not picked up a drink. So I have a lot of time reflecting on this peculiar transformation that has occurred in my life. That doesn't mean I have always been good with the bowl of Cheetos. So I have continued to wrestle with the phenomenon of an unhealthy brain and unhealthy brain patterns. And in my journey, what I have come to do is to try to study and understand what is this phenomenon? Both what was wrong in my crazy self-dysregulation, and what is going on in Hubert, and what is going on in you, and what is going on in you, and what is going on in you. And how are the things that we are suffering, what forms of unity do they exhibit, and what forms of difference is present? Because I do think that both of those things are really important. I'm about to make some very, very broad invitations, and I could be accused of overgeneralizing, and I'm seeking to not do that, because I absolutely do believe that our individual suffering and our individual story is individual. We are not all the same. We do not all, because I have suffered and you have suffered does not mean I know you're suffering. And so I have a deep respect for that. And yet, as I talk about how I find my way out of my suffering, I believe my testimony to my own journey outside of my suffering could be meaningful to you as you seek to find a journey out of your suffering, and reciprocally so. And so one of the most brilliant talks was given yesterday by a fellow named Dr. Patrick Carnes, really important pioneer in addiction medicine and addiction science. I think probably capping out what has been an extraordinary life of giving back. And he talked about belonging and authenticity, meaning making, as that which addiction takes away from us. We lose our capacity to function well as people within a community or tribe. We are the first generation in thousands of years to be intentionally disbanding our collectives. And people who say that, like, Facebook is a substitute that works, that one of the key statistics that I think is very, very concerning, and when I say we, I mean especially America, and I'm not saying that other nations don't have problems, but if you look at mortality statistics in the United States, Americans are living shorter lives. Our mortality, our life expectancy was going up, and now it's not only plateaued, it's going down. It was in the 70s, and now it's in the high 60s, and we're dying faster, younger, and more often. So there's something that's not fostering greater flourishing in our community. And we have community issues, and it's very hard to speak about them because of politics and the divisiveness, and yet if we don't speak about this, it's like that would be like an addict saying, well, I really don't want to talk about my drinking. So if we don't talk about how broken we have become as a society and how much we have made it hard to have authentic belonging, and if we don't talk about the depersonalization and dehumanization of what it is to be an American today in the midst of the millions of other people, and then we're not going to fix the problem. That's an overly naive, optimistic view that I think we can fix the problem. It's not a problem, and I'm not sure we can fix the problem. But I think we should talk about the truth. So I had a story and a thing to share. As I came into my recovery and I started to develop in my recovery, and people told me that I should seek a spiritual solution, I became fascinated and in fact enthralled with the notion that this domain of human striving called spirituality and spiritual care and the discipline of theology and philosophy and wellness, and it's a broad tent, but that was where I should look, caught my interest because I was an atheist and I thought, like, I don't need that. And when somebody said, no, you should look in there, my life was so not working for me that whatever people said I should look at, I was like, okay, I'll look where I don't like to look. And so I looked in the God tent, and I've been looking in there for a long time. And as I went into the tent, I had been Catholic and rejected that, and then I had been atheist and sort of rejected that, and then I was trying to become a Protestant, but I wasn't sure what that was. And when I was becoming this Protestant Christian, it was in a very, very white environment, but I had a really great relationship with a fellow that I met early on in my journey of seminary and education. I was sober, who was an African American, and he said to me, if you want to really know what vibrant spiritual experience is, come with me over this particular 3-day experience. And I was that guy. I mean, I was like, if you had said to me, hey, do you want to do a new hallucinogen? I'd be like, hell yeah. Or, do you want to try a new, there's all these liquors out there that I've never tried, which I have jealousy about. And I'm like, I'll sample anything, right? And so here this fellow says to me, and I was like, what is it? And he goes, it's the African American Clergy Summit. And I'm like, wow, that sounds really out of my ballpark, but I'm all in. So I went to this African American Clergy Summit where the preaching and the music was addressed to a community of persons of color. And obviously I felt like, well, why am I here? And when I started to listen to the music and I started to listen to the preaching, I started having a bizarre, somatic, physical sense of identification and belonging, which transcended my clear sense of not belonging. I was like, suddenly there's something I'm hearing that is like what they're talking about, even though I'm not saying it's all the same. Remember I said it's not all the same, but what I heard was in the songs of freedom and the preaching of liberation from captivity, my own captivity, heard a message that I needed to hear, that it was possible for me. And that's the message I want to ask you to hear from us today. In a time, this is where Dr. Caron finished yesterday, was in a time when we are terribly worried about the millions of people who have died from COVID. We have year after year millions of people who are dying from the various expressions of addiction. And we're not even acting like that's a big problem. We're sort of taking it as, oh, well, and it's always been there. And first of all, it's getting worse. COVID has made it worse. And one of the really important things is, just like we have now vaccines for COVID, we have a solution that actually helps with addiction. And the essence of the solution is belonging and meaning making. So it's tribal. And it is about brain reprogramming, but how do you program the brain originally is a tribal and meaning, is the authorship of a young life. That's how healthy brains develop, is in this long quasi-marsupial family system. We are the organism on the planet that takes the longest time to develop and fledge from the nest. And if that goes awry, it's going to take a long time to re-nest yourself. And you need to know whose nest are you in, and who are you fledging as? Those are the questions, and if you think that can be done in 28 days, you are misleading yourself. 28 days is enough to arrest the crisis and launch you on a program of re-nesting and re-authorship of yourself. But the journey to freedom is one that we have to wage over a long period of time. So now we're going to hear music of the civil rights era and the fight for various kind of transformations of our society echoes in that music. But the transformation for Caron, for us at Magic Mountain today, is freedom from active addiction. And I would like to finish my message this morning by singing an anthem I learned in the African American community about its own struggle for freedom. I'd like to ask you to hear its words in relation to our struggle for freedom, because the title of the song is Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I think it can speak to us, even if it's not necessarily anchored in our tradition, because our suffering does relate to the suffering which brings this song into being. Just going to do the first verse and the chorus. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. So I invite you today to reflect on the journey towards freedom, authenticity, and belonging that is in front of you as a person seeking recovery or continuing. Thank you, Marty.